I know for a fact anime onlys were probably thinking when Galan landed right in front of Meliodas, Diane, Merlin, and all of them, I know many were probably thinking that Galan's power level was probably going to be about 5,000, 8,000, over 9,000. Yes, meme intended. You all were probably thinking it was going to be around that level. But I know for a fact when everybody probably saw his power level get clarified and he had 26,000, I know everybody was probably like, whoa, what? That's a jump. Like, that's a legit jump. I mean, you look at Meliodas' power level that was explained in this episode, and then you look at Galan's power level, which is 26,000, you're like, how are they gonna fight this man? Like, how are you even gonna stand up to a man that is that overwhelmingly powerful? So I'm very curious to see what anime onlys think about that. How do you feel about that jump in power? Now, I do want to say something real quick, okay? Remember what was clarified in this episode? It was clarified that the Ten Commandments, their power level is almost at the bottom of their threshold. For instance, they have weakened considerably. They're not near their max at all. So, basically, 26,000 for Galan, that's like bottom of the barrel for him. That means he is a lot stronger than that. If he, regenerates his strength and all that back again, it's going to be way higher. So, that puts in perspective of how insane this man is compared to everyone else. Just, that's a massive jump compared to, Hendrickson that we dealt with at the end of Season 1, and now this right here with the Ten Commandments. It's just, it's kind of scary. So with the first part of the episode, we get to see, Hendrickson crawling on the ground, trying to warn everybody of what's happening with the Ten Commandments. Now, many are probably scratching their heads and are like, whoa, what's going on here? Like, isn't Hendrickson like a bad guy? I mean, look at Season 1. Well, here's the big thing. You gotta pull from that, okay? You gotta kind of fill in the blanks. Basically, from what you can get from the whole Dreyfus thing and all that with him talking with the Ten Commandments in that scene at the beginning of the episode, is that Dreyfus, his body was getting controlled by a demon, one of the Ten Commandments. And because of that, it was like Hendrickson was being manipulated as well, and now that he knows what's really going on, it's kind of like he snapped back open and realizes everything, and he's trying to warn everybody about the Ten Commandments. That's basically to clarify that segment. So, yeah, Hendrickson has a role to play. Redemption arc? Possibility. Now, getting into the real beef of the episode, which is the King stuff. So, King is one of my personal favorites. Go-to favorite character is Ban. I'm just gonna say, he is my go-to favorite character. I've always loved Ban as a character. I mean, I always have loved Ban. He's been through some rough times. I mean, a lot of rough times. I love him. He's a great character, okay? And I do love it when he is on screen or on panel or whatever in, an episode. And seeing him in this episode, I was happy. But at the same time, it's not just Ban that's one of my favorites. King is as well. And we had a King-centered episode, and it was a really good episode to kind of give King a little bit of redemption. Because King has always held this weight within his heart that he abandoned the Fairy Forest, his fellow members of, his clanmen. He abandoned the fairies, and he's always held this guilt ever since the beginning of his character introduction. He felt guilty about leaving his sister behind Elaine. He felt guilty by allowing the Fairy Forest to get destroyed, and Ban came up and saved it. I mean, he feels extremely guilty overall. The entirety of it, he's always held this weight, and which is how he got his sin in the first place. And this episode is kind of more along the lines of King redeeming himself. Now, we know for a fact it's not King's fault. Like, all that happened, like, in, the flashback and how he got his sin, it wasn't necessarily his fault. Just things happened, and it caused, him to not be able to save the Fairy Forest at that time. And even then, though, he still blames himself a lot for it. And so, in this episode, it's kind of like he is winning the favor back of the fairies once again. He's allowing them to see that he truly isn't a bad king. He does care for them, and he does want to, lead them in a way. And so when you see the man starting to fight Albion and all that, trying to fight up against this monster, you're like, yo, this is the time for King to shine and for people to realize that he isn't someone that just abandoned them. He just had his own reasons for it. And so he stands up, the fairies realize what's going on, and they decide to try to protect the man. Now, this moment, this entire segment with the fairies realizing that, King was actually a good dude and all that, and he is the real fairy king, this segment in the anime was a lot better than the manga. Like, here's a quick panel, okay, I want to have on the screen here. This panel is from the manga when Hellbrum was doing, like, his little speech and all that to King while, King is being dragged off by, Jaharde. This entire segment, it was done way better in the anime. The anime definitely nailed this part with the music, to the animation, to the backgrounds and all of that. It looked absolutely amazing. So, I will give props when it's needed. Like, that was a really good part of this episode. The emotions of it and all of that, it definitely just way better than the manga. And so if I can expect more stuff like this from future scenes, for instance a certain sun scene, then I know for a fact that this is probably going to be an epic ride. Now, I do want to mention that King, he finally used his sacred treasure for the first time. Like, he's always had it, but he's never really activated it. And the reason for it is pretty obvious after you watch this episode. But there is something that was cut out from this episode that was in the manga. It's nothing major, don't worry, it's nothing major, but it's a little detail that kind of expands upon how damaging the sacred treasure is to King's body. So to start off, King, he activates his sacred treasure, and as we know, the sacred treasure allows King to access the entire pond, or the entire lake, and if you don't use it, like use your sacred treasure, you can only access a couple of drops from your full potential power. So like, for instance, let's say King's overall threshold of power was like, 20,000, okay? 20,000 power in total. Well, without a sacred treasure, he might be only able to access maybe 3,000 of that, or 5,000 of that. He can barely access the entirety of his threshold of his strength. So that's basically what a sacred treasure is for. And so, with him using his sacred treasure, it's kind of like he was tapping into his true level of power. And that was how he was able to overcome the Albion, even though it was implied to be at Hindy's level at the end of Season 1. Now, once again, the reason why King never really used this is because to use this sacred treasure, it has a lot of drawbacks, which, like I said, were incredibly obvious in this episode, but there was one little detail that was excluded for censorship reasons. So when King activates his sacred treasure, which looks amazing, by the way, when he activates it, you see how this man is, like, going full power, and he wipes out the Albion. But in that moment, if you look at King's body, he looks incredibly hurt and exhausted. Now, I will have a panel on screen here where you can see, this is from the manga. You will see an image to where King is going in with the sacred treasure, and you see to where his fingernails are legit peeling off from the sheer power of the sacred treasure. So, basically, using the sacred treasure, it overloads his body. His body cannot handle that power. It severely damages him. So, he cannot just use and spam his sacred treasure like that constantly, which explains why he hasn't used it before. And the only reason why he used it this time was because he wanted to redeem himself, and he wanted to prove that he was someone that didn't abandon the fairy forest. He felt guilty about it, and he just wanted to be able to do something for them. So that's why he pushed himself that far. So there you go, there's your clarification, but for censorship reasons, they didn't clarify how much damage it really did to his body, but it did hurt him quite a bit. So, yeah, really cool scene overall. I'm very pleased with the way it was done. Animation department and all that, very good stuff, and I want more of that. They did such a good scene for King, I can't imagine the stuff later on. I really am looking forward to it. So, let's get into the Bon stuff. So, Bon and Jaharde, hopefully I'm saying, her name right. I know for a fact her name is very weird to pronounce, but, she, as we know, is more like an advisor to the Fairy King. And in this episode, we could see that she does not like Bon at all. She does not think of Bon as the Fairy King. She thinks of Bon as kind of like a good person. He's done some good things. I mean, he has replanted the fairy forest. He is someone that's come to grow the forest back. Obviously, he's kind of a good dude. She realizes this. But at the same time, she doesn't recognize Bon as the Fairy King and wants to use the man as the Fountain of Youth. For instance, imprison him and allow him to just basically his blood to drain to fuel the forest for the forest can continuously grow. And so it's kind of messed up in a way, but it also clarifies what happened to her, or what might have happened to her, and we need to wonder what really pushed her that far to act like she is in this episode. Even though Bon has shown time and time again, he is a good dude, and he does care about the fairy forest, or at the very least, he's trying to carry on the legacy for Elaine. Now, that's pretty much it when it comes to all of that. So, yeah. Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. How do you all feel about this week's episode of Taizai? Did you enjoy it? Did you hate it? Be honest in the comments below. And if you enjoy my content, please subscribe. If you like this video, please leave a like. I love you guys. If you want to get notified for whenever I upload a video, please click the bell icon down below. Be safe, stay warm, stay healthy. Chibi out.